What's up guys, welcome to another episode. So in the last video you guys saw me put the engine together, assemble it, get it ready to go in the car, all that stuff. So this weekend is the exciting part of actually getting that engine in the car. But before I actually get the engine in the car and start working on that stuff, I do need to get the transmission ready to go. I just need to take the transmission apart just so I can get access to one of the holes that completely stripped out all of the threads. So I am gonna need to drill that out, tap it, and then put a thread insert in there. So yeah, so I'm gonna work on that, taking it apart and putting it back together. And hopefully by the end of this video, I mean, you guys can see that it isn't really that hard. Definitely the hardest part is putting the transmission back together, so just be aware of that before you guys attempt to take your transmission apart. And just a little disclaimer, I'm not going to show you guys taking the actual gear sets apart. I'm actually going to keep my gear sets completely intact and assembled. I'm just going to take it out of the transmission and set it on a table. So if you guys are interested in seeing like the gear sets and everything like that, the synchros, I'm not really covering any of that in my video, so just be aware of that. So I'm gonna get over there now and start working on that. So let's get to it. Alright, so here we are. There is the transmission right there that I'm gonna be taking apart. If you guys can see that right there, T2W4. And yeah, if you look that up, this is the transmission out of H22 Euro R, so out of the Accord Euro R. So this transmission is one of the shortest gear, if not the shortest gear ratio H22 transmission you can get. This does have a factory helical LSD. So the first thing I'm going to work on is taking the shifter apart, and basically it's just 4 bolts, which these are usually going to be like 10mm bolts right there. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. And what I do for this bolt over here, you just kind of have to move this thing, the shift selector, pull it out and then down or up, whatever. And basically by doing that, locking it into like first or whatever gear that is, once you kind of lock it in place like that, you actually have full access to that bolt right there. Besides the shift selector, the next thing you're going to want to worry about is the 2 detents right here. These are going to be the bolts with the spring inside and the little ball bearing. And then the last thing, so this is something that I think a lot of people kind of forget, especially when it comes time to take the case off, is this bolt right here that actually holds the that bolts into the reverse shaft. Or bolts up to a reverse gear, holds that in place. So don't forget that one. I actually always do this one first just because you kind of get caught up in the moment sometimes and forget that. So then once you have this bolt out, the 2 detents, and the entire shifter assembly off, then you can start worrying about taking off all of the 12mm bolts all around the case. So there's going to be quite a bit of those, I think like 10 or 12 or something like that, I forget exactly how much. And then the last 2 would be these 2 14mm bolts right there. And those are going to be really, really long bolts. You kind of see they go all the way down and then bolt to the bell housing over here. So those are really long bolts there. Then once you have all those bolts loose, you want to get this cracked open and then separate that snap ring. Once you separate that snap ring, the gear set should fall down just a little bit. Once you have the gear set, once you hear that gear set fall down slightly, then this case is ready to come up and it can come off. So yeah, so that's just like a general overview. I'm gonna go ahead and get the GoPro and get started on this now. You just want to make sure it's in neutral, and then you can kind of have to work this thing off. It could be a little bit difficult to take off because there is some sealant on there. So just pry that off little fork right there. And yeah, there's just gonna be some Honda bond on this. So yeah, I'm gonna need to like clean that out pretty thoroughly. So for now, I'm just gonna put that off to the side. On here, if you guys can see that, there's gonna be this little like, kind of like a little like lock washer almost. So you can just bend that out of the way, and then you should have access to this 12mm bolt. All right, so once you get that 12mm bolt off, then you can see that the shaft is free to spin. You can basically just pop this shaft out. Set that down right there. To take this apart, it's really simple actually. You can just pull this guy out separate, and once you have this piece off, you can basically just kind of like pry this guy. You can pry this one from the bottom, and this will pop off. So there is a little bolt down here under there, if you can see that, that will pull this guy out, but I mean, I've never done that. You can just pull it out like this, and you could also put it back together like this. So I don't really see the need to pull that out. Now I'm gonna go ahead and take these detents off. These are 12mm bolts right here. And again, with these, the detents are the bolts with the little springs in there, and then there's gonna be little ball bearings inside there. So what I do is just take the bolts off and then just lean it over to get those. But yeah, I just tip it over, grab them. You do want to make sure that you get this bolt right here. This is the bolt for the reverse gear. So this is a 14 right here. And now I'm going to go ahead and get this cap off. And you basically just need a 1/2 inch drive to be able to take that off. That exposes the infamous snap ring, or the set ring, the C-clip, whatever you want to call it. So you can kind of see this makes the job a whole lot easier. And as soon as I opened it up, you can hear a little noise. And that's basically the entire gear set just shifting downward a little bit. So as soon as I separated it, if you guys can see in there, you guys can see that now the snap ring is open all by itself. And that's because the entire gear set just shifted downward a little bit. And that is going to be very, very important to know whenever you're putting it back together. Because to get that back in there, you are going to have to play with the input shaft to move everything back up so that the ring could lock in place. So yeah, so now that ring is good to go. I'm gonna go ahead and get all of the transmission case bolts loose, and we should be able to pry the case open and get the case off. And this right here, this bolt or this hole is basically the reason why I'm taking this entire transmission apart, is so I can put a thread insert in this hole right here. All right, and then now I'm just gonna go ahead and then right now I just have these two bolts right here, which these two are actually 14 millimeters. And then with these bolts, this one you can actually pull out all the way. This one kind of stays stuck here because of the stud. I don't really feel like taking out that stud just to take that bolt out. To me, it's not really a big deal. So yeah, so I basically got all of the bolts all around taken off. This is loose, you can see that bolt is out. The C-clip is open, so I can go ahead and pry on this thing, pry on the case, get it separated from the RTV, and I should be able to pull it right out. And right here, the side where the actual like clutch fork is, this is a good side to pry on, this little thing. You don't want to go too hard because this is cast aluminum, but just, you know, just enough to get it separated. And just like that. So you can hear that, it already broke the seal. Yeah, you can see that that's moving freely. So now I should be able to pull the case off of the belt housing. Just like that. So there you go. And I'll just go ahead and set the case right there for now. And yeah, here you go. So there's the transmission. You have the differential. If you guys can see in there, you can see all the little gears that make up the helical LSD. So yeah, so basically from here, to actually take the gear set off, or to take it apart further from here, all you're gonna need, you just need to take out these two 10 mil bolts right here. And basically all this is just the reverse selector. So you can see right there, this is the reverse gear, and whenever you go into reverse, it drops that down, boom, attaches to this gear, and that's basically it. So yeah, you just need to take out these two 10 mil bolts. Then from there, you can actually take out the reverse gear. Once that's all apart, you should be able to just take the entire gear set all off together, and there we go. So that's basically all I'm going to do, is just take the gear set off and take the diff out. From there, clean everything up. Then I'm going to paint the transmission case. Then I'll start rebuilding everything. So those 10 mil bolts, then you can basically grab the selector out. You might have to go into fourth gear, put it in fourth gear to actually be able to fully pull this out. But yeah, once you put the once you lock it into fourth gear, you should be able to fully pull the shaft out. And here's the gear. So basically just know that when you're putting the gear back on, you want to make sure that the actual teeth are facing upward. And then there is only one way that this shaft can go in, so you can't really mess that up. You can see right there, there is like a little groove, and you can see on the shaft there's like this little pin, so it could only slide in that way. And from here I should be able to take out the gear set. So I should be able to pull this all apart in one piece. So just like this. And I am trying to keep this all together because I don't want to have to fight with this thing whenever I am putting it back in the transmission. So that's the gear set taken out, and then from here you should be able to just pull the diff right out. It is heavy, but it'll pull out. All right, and then there's the diff all out. So yeah, so now that I have all of this apart, I'm gonna go ahead and clean this all out thoroughly. I'm gonna clean all the RTV off of this, clean the RTV off of this, clean this all out, clean the inside of this, clean the outside of everything. Then I'm gonna go ahead and paint the outside of these cases. All right, and here you go. I have the bell housing and the transmission case all painted, and they're looking really, really good. I'm super happy with how everything came out. So this is where I'm going to leave off for tonight. I'm going to clean up, head out of here, and I will be back first thing in the morning tomorrow to finish putting this thing back together. And from there, it's time to get this thing in the car. So I am super, super stoked right now. I'm very excited. I hope you guys are as well. So I'm going to head out of here. I'll get back to you guys first thing in the morning tomorrow. Alright, so I am back at my parents' crib now. Now I'm going to go ahead and start putting the transmission back together, and I'll show you guys that process. So I did let the paint dry overnight and everything, so I mean that's like over 12 hours I would say, so it should be pretty dry, and if not, oh well. I'm going to start throwing this thing together now, and let's get to it. Alright, and I just got the thread insert put into that hole right there. So now the bell housing is ready for the case to go back on, so I'm going to start throwing everything back together now. Alright, so I just got the differential in place, and you can just see that that's spinning freely. That should spin freely because it's resting on top of a bearing. So if it isn't spinning, stop there, you're doing something wrong. Check it out. So now that I have the diff in place, now I could actually put the gear set back in place. Okay, so it is staying intact. Alright, so you basically just want to line everything up. So mainly the input shaft, set that in there first. Then you need to be careful over here with the final drive gear. Just kind of want to make sure that's going into the grooves nicely. Then the last thing, you want to make sure these shift forks are lining up into those holes. Okay, it's not falling into place. There we go. Okay, so just fell into place. I'm gonna go ahead and make sure that it's in neutral. Neutral, and it should spin. Should spin freely. Just like that. So you don't want to spin it too much while it's dry. Be careful with that. But it does spin freely, so that's good. So now the next thing I'm gonna do is get the reverse gear in place. Then you can see this little pin here. That just basically aligns with that groove. So you can't really mess up the orientation of this. So that falls into place like that. And there you go. So from there, the next thing you want to take care of is the reverse gear selector. So then when putting the reverse selector, you can kind of see that there's a little ball bearing right here. So that's a little detent. And that's going to go up against this shaft right here. You can see there's those little grooves, if you can see that. So that goes along with that. This little L-shaped hole locks in place with that little thing that sticks out. And then this over here goes on the actual gear. So something kind of like this. So like that. Then you just got to put the, these are just 10mm bolts right here. All right, so with that tightened in place, you can kind of see that it does work now. So yeah, that's good. So right now, everything is currently in neutral and it is basically ready to have the case put on top of this. But before I do that, what I'm gonna go ahead and do is I have this right here, this transmission assembly lube. So I'm gonna go through and just apply this lube everywhere where there's going to be metal on metal contact or anywhere where there's contact. And basically that's just to kind of help out with whenever it's being rotated or anything like that before I actually have oil in there, just so I can actually, it can all be good to go, you know? So I'm just gonna go through, lube everything up. So I just went through and got that transmission assembly lube put all over all of the gears, the differential, all over the bearing. Ooh, hold on. Forgot this bearing here. Okay, now all of the bearings and everything are now all lubed up. So it is ready to actually get the case back on here. I did already go through and clean off the entire mating surface really well with some brake cleaner. So from here, I can start putting on the Honda Bond. So you will need to put like an RTV around this surface right here just to prevent the oil from leaking, anything like that. And then from there, I will show you guys some tricks as far as putting the case back on because I have struggled with this in the past before. One thing that I would recommend you doing as well, if this is like your first time working on a transmission, I would recommend before you even put the RTV or anything like that, I would recommend practicing putting the case on here. Just because once you have that RTV on, you're gonna have like limited time to work with. And if you haven't really even tried putting this case back on, I would recommend getting some practice attempts just so you can kind of see what you're in for. So one of the main things that gave me a hard time is this little washer, these little grooves here. So this washer thing, this big thing, you kind of want to align it like this way. You want this little short squared one to be opposite of the shift selector. And just so you guys can get a visual, this groove right here, this big long thing in there, if you guys can see that, that big long groove right there should fit right in between these guys. So it should go slide right in there. So basically, if you kind of think about it, this groove is just offset a little bit to the side of the shaft. So you want to kind of line it up right there. Another thing that I do struggle with as well when getting this case on is the first and second gear shift fork. So this thing right here, this thing, you can kind of see that there's a lot of play in it and it kind of wiggles. So if you think about it, this shaft right here, this fork, needs to be going inside that hole right over there. If you guys can see that hole over there. So that hole is kind of, it's messy, you know, there's like a lot of stuff in the way. So sometimes whenever you're trying to get the case on, this can bind up, and then sometimes it wants to shift it down into first gear. So you just kind of want to be careful with that. You can kind of play around with it whenever you're getting the case on, because whenever you're trying to get the case on, you actually have that access hole right there. So you can play around with it a little bit. Another thing that I would recommend is have everything in neutral. Have it all in neutral, and it should slide in a little bit easier. So I just got Honda Bond all over the mating surface here. So yeah, so the first thing, I would definitely recommend getting these pliers here. So these are called set ring pliers. So you can kind of see they have like a flat knurled surface on the outside, and it allows you to spread that open. So this is going to be really easy for getting the snap ring apart. So this will definitely make this job way easier. I picked this up for like 12 bucks from O'Reilly's, so not a big deal. So when you're getting the case on, I would definitely recommend keeping the transmission like on a flat surface while you're trying to just get the case on. So again, you do need to kind of be careful for this second and first gear shift fork, because it's kind of offset a little bit. And then you want to make sure that this is aligned this way. So this little square thing coming down, and then this kind of off to the side. All right, there we go. That's what I was looking for right there. All right, so at the moment I was able to get the case down and kind of like set in place. It is almost there. It's really close. I have it at a point where I really like it right now. And as you can see, or if you guys can see that, the set ring is open and it is over the bearing. It's almost there. It's just not quite locked into that little groove just yet. And I think this is where a lot of people struggle, is getting that ring to kind of set into that groove, that last little bit. Sometimes people will just kind of like reach their hand underneath and then grab the input shaft and just push it up. And that should kind of get the entire gear set to move upward to lock it in place. But this is kind of what I do here. This helps me out. And let's see if you guys can hear it. So I basically just grab the soft pad and I turn the transmission on the pad, and just be careful just not to let it separate again. So then I just put the weight on the case, then you basically just want to lift it and drop it. And if you heard that noise, that was the set ring locking in place. So let's go ahead and turn it back over. All right, and If you guys look in there now, you guys can see that set ring perfectly in place. So that is what we're looking for right there. And yeah, that's all locked up. So now I'm gonna go ahead and get all of these 12mm bolts that hold the case down. I'm gonna snug them down just so the Honda bond can make contact, and then from there I'll go ahead and torque everything down. Alright, and now that we don't really have to worry about that set ring anymore, I'm going to go ahead and just put this cap back on. And I kind of have read mixed things on this. A lot of people recommend putting thread sealer on this, and a lot of people say that you can actually crack the case if you put thread sealer on this. So I would rather not find out if the case will crack by putting thread sealer on. So I'm not gonna put thread sealer on for now. If it ever does start leaking in the future, then I'll put thread sealer on there. So the next thing that I'm gonna do is get this reverse bolt in. Alright, so putting the shifter assembly back together is actually pretty dang straightforward. The first thing that you're going to want to place in is going to be this thing, this outer like sleeve thing, whatever you want to call it. And you want to make sure that you're all in neutral. So you want to make sure that the select, like the shift forks, you want to make sure they're all even, they're all level, because that will make this a whole lot easier. This first gear shift fork's super annoying. So yeah, you just kind of want to throw it in there, and you want to make sure, so the main thing is you want to make sure that this thing locks in that groove, and you want to make sure that these two things go on that like shift fork basically. Once you have that in place, then you can go ahead and throw this guy in there. So if you look at it, this thing is what actually goes on those shift forks. So you just kind of want to throw that in. And another thing, these little grooves right here, these little like detents, that just goes up against that little ball bearing right there. So you can go ahead and kind of like throw that in there, and it should all kind of stay intact. And the main thing is you just want to make sure that it's in those shift forks, okay? Alright, so I just put a little bit of grease on this thing to help it kind of like slide right on. There it is. Then you can go ahead and actually throw your shaft in there, and you just want to line up the threaded hole with that hole right there. Okay, so once you line up that hole, you're just going to want to throw this little washer. So this little washer has like a little like locking thing, so that just kind of locks in place. So that locks in place right there, and then you can actually throw your bolt in. So again, this is just a 12mm bolt. Alright. Alright, so that does go through all the gears, but you can see that it's free to move side to side, so that's what the actual case takes care of. So the case itself actually has this like spring-loaded thing right there, if you guys can see that, and that basically just goes up against this, and that's what helps do the side-to-side selection. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw, I already did put some Honda bond on this case right here, so I'm just gonna go ahead and get everything on now. You want to make sure that it's locked into the neutral position. You want to make sure that it's in the neutral position, just because this assembly is always in the neutral position because it's spring loaded. And if it is in the neutral position, it should all go through, line up. And again, whenever you're trying to access this hole right here, a little trick I like doing is just pull on it and lock it in place. Alright, so I'll go ahead and tighten all this stuff down and then we'll get working on the next thing. And now with that case back on there, you can see that the side to side selection does work. First, second, third, fourth, fifth, reverse. So the shifter assembly is good to go. Next thing I'm going to do is take care of these detents. Basically you just have the little ball bearing, you just want to throw that in the hole. Then you're going to have the actual bolt with the big hole in it, and then you're going to have a spring. So you just want to put that spring in there. Now I can go ahead and get the reverse light switch or the reverse switch screwed on. And then one of the last things I need to take care of is the actual speed sensor. So when you're kind of, oh, that actually went in smoothly. Sometimes you kind of have to like wiggle it side to side so that you can make sure that the gear kind of engages, because sometimes that gear doesn't line up so smoothly. Alright, and there you go. The H22 transmission is now fully assembled and ready to go. The only thing that I need to do is get the like the clutch fork and everything just secured in place, but that's really easy. So now that this is done, the engine is ready to go. I have a clutch and flywheel chilling right over there. Yeah, this engine is ready to go together and go in the car now. But before I actually get started on putting the engine in the car, I actually have a couple like maintenance things that I need to do to the daily. So if you guys can see that, I need to replace the front passenger CV axle. So I will try to get all of this done as fast as possible and then get cracking on getting the engine in the car. So the 4Runner basically took up the rest of my day yesterday. As I thought, that's why I kind of wanted to get it all done yesterday, make sure it's all ready to go, so I could have all of today to just focus my attention on the engine and getting the engine in the car. So right now, I'm going to just button up a couple last minute little things on the engine. Then I'm gonna take off the ITBs, take off the header, some little brackets and stuff like that. Then I could actually strap it up, get it ready to go on the engine hoist. Once it's on the engine hoist, I could get the flywheel and clutch bolted up. Then I can make the transmission on there and we can get the engine in the car. So I'm super stoked right now. I'm gonna go ahead and get started on all of that. Alright, so I just went through, got the engine ready. So I took the header off, I took the ITBs off. I just checked the timing for one last time, and then I did get masking tape over the ports here. Alright guys, so here it is. It's all strapped up on the engine hoist. I have the transmission sitting right here ready to go on the engine, and I just went ahead and put some moving blankets all over the car just to kind of help out with any scratching or anything like that. Then basically once I kind of have it in place, I obviously am going to have to move this to get to the engine mounts right there. So yeah, so right now what I'm going to go ahead and do, now that I have it off the engine stand, I could actually take that off, then I could get the flywheel on, get the clutch on, and then get the transmission on there, and we could get it in. Alright, and here's just a quick look at the setup that I'm going to be installing right now. So this right here is a Fidanza lightweight flywheel. Then I'm running a stage 2 exity clutch. So it is a 4-puck sprung clutch. So the 4-puck should be pretty grabby. It should have some drivability because it is sprung. So that is a good thing. So I'm going to go ahead and start off with bolting that up to the block, and we'll go from there. Alright, so when installing the flywheel, the only thing that you really need to pay attention to is this little pin right here. So there's like a little pin that sticks up, and if you notice on the flywheel, you could actually see it right there. There's that little pin, so you just kind of want to make sure that those line up. Where is it? Oh, right there. And there it is. So I'm just going to go ahead and run one bolt in just so it can kind of stay in place. Then I could get the rest of them on there. So I'm going to go ahead and torque these down, and these are supposed to be torqued down to 76 foot-pounds. Alright, so I just got the flywheel fully torqued down, but now what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to clean up the clutch and the pressure plate with some brake cleaner, and then we'll go ahead and get that on the engine and torque down. Before I get the clutch on, I'm just going to clean the flywheel off really good with some brake cleaner. So yeah, and then just know whenever you're putting the pressure plate on, it's not going to fit flush. It's never going to fit flush until it's fully torqued down. You need to make sure that you follow the right torque sequence when you're torquing this down, because that is going to be really important to how your clutch actually works or how it functions. Because basically, just know as you're torquing it down, you're basically putting like a preload on this pressure plate, and the torque spec is 19 foot-pounds. Alright, so now I'm going to go through and torque down the pressure plate for the clutch. Alright, so really quick before I actually get the transmission on the engine, I do need to get a couple things ready. I need to get the throwout bearing in here, get the clutch fork, and the little clutch fork boot. So before you do put any of this in here, you want to make sure that you grease up a couple areas. And there you go. So that's all good to go. It's all greased. And then the last thing, you just kind of want to grease this outside groove on the throwout bearing where it actually goes and makes contact with this part right here. Alright, so the other night I basically got right out of here as soon as I got the engine in, just because it got really late, but I really wanted to get it done. I just wanted to have the engine in the car. So here it is. You guys can get a closer look at it. So yeah, so I mean, getting it in was pretty straightforward. I just had a little bit of issues just because it's pretty long, so you can kind of see how close the actual like crank pulley is, and then how close the transmission is. So I did kind of have to like maneuver it in a weird way. I kind of had to go down on the transmission that way while the crank was over here in this area, and then kind of go down that way. You know, it was kind of a weird setup, but you guys kind of saw that in the time lapse. So yeah, so I mean, at this point basically I'm just gonna go ahead and start throwing some stuff together, like putting the headers, getting the ITBs, everything like that on there, and just getting everything ready for the next step. So now that the engine in, I mean, my work here is definitely not done. I still have a lot to do. So I just started making myself a checklist and everything, and the first thing on the checklist is to get the fuel lines done. I do need to start mapping out like where I want my fuel lines to go. Yeah, and I'm just gonna be making all of my fuel lines from scratch. So if you guys did see the like brake line video, you guys saw that I already adapted the factory hard lines down there to AN fittings. So from there I am going to be making custom AN fuel lines. So that will be in the next video. So make sure you guys hit that subscribe button if you guys want to see that.